Hey guys, welcome back to CheatSheetPros.com. Today we're going to take a look at our NFL Week 7 daily fantasy sports breakdown. So make sure to subscribe to the channel or go to the website CheatSheetPros.com as we have our articles over there. We also hit on the prize picks and player props for NFL Week 7 and our Week 7 sports betting picks. And our YouTube video, we went over every game and I kind of told you if I like it, don't like it, if I'm leaning one way or another. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to our quick stack tab on the NFL cheat sheet, and we're going to recap a few ways we can look at this, and we're going to find some stacks. So for GPP tournaments and daily fantasy sports, I prefer to stack a QB with 2 pass catchers for the offensive side and run it back with 1 on the other side. That's kind of the preferred method. You can run it back with 2, but then you really limit yourself unless that game explodes. So one of the things I do when I first come up here, just to give you a quick tour, is this is the cost of the stack. This is the projected point for the stack. This is the value based on the cost. And then we have a target calculation. We have an average fantasy points calculation. We have the ceiling game for the season. And then the cap space that it takes up, which we want to try to stay below 50%. That gives us some good builds where we're not squeezing in a bunch of punts. And then if you assume a $2,800 defense, this is how much money per player you would have left based on that cap space. And this is your Vegas team implied total, which is key when looking at getting some cheap pieces. So I've got 5 stacks that I want to go ahead and look at. And you can also change these with the drop down here. So if you want QB, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, that's what we post the sheet at. But you can go down to wide receiver 3 and see what it gives you. You can go over here, choose tight end. You want to get real tricky, you can go to tight end 2 and get a cheap stack. Or if you like, stacking a running back in there, if it's a pass catching back like McKissick or someone like that, you can take a look and see what that runs. You can also come over here to the other side and do the same thing. Say you want to run it back with a tight end and save a little money. Flip them, say, okay, Hawkinson, Ricky Seals, Pitts. It gives you Kelsey, Waller, Gesicki. It gives you some different options. And when you change those, it's going to change everything in here. It's going to change your stack price, your value, targets, average. So it's something you can play with. It's a neat little tool. When I post it, I do wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, run it back with the wide receiver 1, and then I tinker and do wide receiver 1, tight end 1. So let's go ahead and take a look. So the first thing that I go ahead and do, I'm going to look at the wide receiver tight end because that's one of my favorite ones to do. And I'm going to sort it by average value over here. So this is good for cash games. Ceiling's good for GPP. And stack targets is good for GPP because you might get a stack that's cheap, not priced up yet, but there's a lot of targets that could turn into a lot of points. But for this, to start off, I go over here at average fantasy points, value, stack, and I'm looking at wide receiver 1, tight end 1. So a couple that jump out at me is this one right up here on top. Lamar Jackson, Marquise Brown, Mark Andrews, and Jamar Chase. Now, I don't really like taking a wide receiver 2 in a Baltimore run first deal, but Brown and Andrews have been pretty consistent for the most part, so I really like them if this game gets into a shootout because those are the 2 main targets. And then running it back with Jamar Chase on the other side, that gives us a stack price of 25.4. And then if we go over here, it's 51% of our cap space, so it's a little expensive. We like to be below 50%, but 50 to 55% it's expensive, but it's not bad. You can do it. So that's going to leave you about 5,500 per player left. So that's very doable on DK. So that's one that I really like, especially for cash games. And then when we scroll down here, we can kind of look at some of the other games. And one that jumped out at me was Atlanta. So Atlanta, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know they're coming off of a bye. They're facing Miami, who just played in London, so they're likely going to be jet lagged. So I like this stack here because you get Matt Ryan, Calvin Ridley, who's coming back after a 2-game personal leave, Kyle Pitts, who just had his final blow-up game last week, and then you're running it back with Waddle. And I don't mind running it back with Gesicki, but when I was looking at this, I was shocked at the cost. So we're at 48% cap space, which leaves us about 5,800 to 6,000 per player, which was really good. Now, if you want to see what Gesicki looks like, you can just click over here, excuse me, to the tight end, and then that takes us down to 46% of cap space, and so we have over 6,000 per player if you want to run a line and run it back with Gesicki. So that's definitely an option there. That's another one that I like. And then another thing we can do, let's look at the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, and then we are going to look at the projected value now. So this is the projected value, and so we're going to sort it by stack value. And then some of the ones that jump out at me, like if you want to do cash, like I don't mind Kansas City here. Kansas City's expensive. You can see it's about as high as we want to be at 55% of our cap space. So it only leaves us around 4,900 to 5,000 per player. But it does have a huge team implied total. I mean, this game's got a 57.5. And this is a decent pivot if you don't want to go with the Derrick Henry chalk that's probably going to be 40% owned this weekend. But it would give you Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, and A.J. Brown. Now, putting Hill and Kelsey is not really effective because it's hard for them to blow up. Tennessee's been really good against the tight ends, so I'm hoping they cover Kelsey more and then Tyreek Hill can get free. So this weekend, I prefer a Mahomes-Hill stack. And then we need another cheap piece. We can't afford Kelsey, so Mecole's one that's getting a bunch of targets. I like to squeeze him in there and then run it back with an A.J. Brown. I don't know if Julio's going to play, but definitely someone that I'm looking at. I like it for cash games, and even for cash games, I'd probably run it back with a Derrick Henry, which I'm sure is going to be astronomical. Another one that comes out is Miami. Now we have, where'd they go? There they are. So Miami, so Tua last week, we saw what he did. Let me pull him up. So Tua last week came back from a few game absence, and as long as he doesn't get traded magically, he did really well last week. 33 of 47, 329 yards, 2 touchdowns, and even rushed for another 22 yards for 25 DK points. I was pretty impressed with that against Atlanta. Or no, wait, not. He's playing Atlanta this week. Sorry, he played Jacksonville last week. So Tua, and then Waddle, Parker, Ridley. Well, I don't really like Parker as much. I'd rather have Gesicki. So let's plug Gesicki in there. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I don't sound like a moron that should be licking windows. So we got Tua, Waddle, Gesicki, and run back with Ridley. I love that. That looks good. Now, Miami is probably jet lagged, but if they're going to stay in this game and go up against that Atlanta defense, this could become an ugly shootout. And I mean, if you look at the pricing and everything on this, it's only 45% of cap space. So that leaves you 6,200 plus per player. So I like that. That's not too bad. And going back over here to wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, we can kind of flip down and, you can see some other players. You can sort this by cost of stack. My favorite thing to do is get a cheap stack and hope it goes off and then fill in with just studs. So if you can get Derrick Henry and Devontae Adams and, all these big guys, it's fun because if your stack goes off, then you're like, hey, I got Derrick Henry left. Then that's a lot of fun, especially for cash games. So now going back, looking at the QB, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, and a run back, one of the things I like to do is come over here and, you can sort by cost of stack or cap space is going to be the same and sort it low to high. So 55, you can see this is the high end. If we get below 50, if we get down below 45 in this range, then we get into some cheap stacks that are a lot of fun to play with. And so what I do is I compare it to this team implied total over here. So 17, 17, 17, 15, 19. That's typically what you're going to see on these cheaper stacks. But a couple that jump out at me, you have 24.5. So that's giving you New England. I don't really like the New England stack that well. Cleveland's not on the main slate, so we're going to skip over that one. So this gives you Jalen Hurts, Devontae, Rager, and Ruggs. I don't mind it. That Philly-Vegas game could be sneaky. And then right here, this one jumps out at me. So they have a team implied total of 26 with only 43% cap space, giving you 63 to 6,500 per player left. So this is a fun one. Carr, Ruggs, Renfro, and run back with Devontae Smith. That's a cheap stack that would be good for GPPs. And let's take a look at Carr and see how he's done. Oh, not VST. Derek Carr. So he's had some huge games. 382 yards, 386 yards, 341 yards. Had two dud games against Chicago. Has 2 touchdowns, 2. So 2 touchdowns in every game except for this game against Chicago. Fantasy points, 24 to 27 the majority of the time, 28, 27, 25. And he's 6,000. So, I mean, that's 4.5x, pushing 5x, so we don't mind him. So let's put him in there with Ruggs. Let's see what this looks like. So Ruggs is obviously questionable, so make sure he's playing. And Renfro. And I'm going to run over here to our stack tab and look at this game as well. And we like Vegas because they're at home. And so when I come over here, I'm looking at the fantasy point production. And so you can see Carr's done pretty well. This is just their week by week fantasy points. Jacobs has been involved last couple weeks. Their receivers here really haven't blown up a ton, so we need to get some more action. Ruggs is clearly the guy who's had the biggest ceiling with a 25-5 and an 18-7 game. Renfro's been in there. Renfro's been pretty consistent. 13, 10, 12, 18, 16. He's been pretty good. Edwards, not so much. He's boom bust. Snead, pretty much nothing. And Waller, after the huge game, I was all excited. He's kind of blah. And with Waller's price tag, he's almost unplayable. Just under 7,000, and he's barely hitting 2x. So he's like a 1.5 to 2x type of player. So if we go ahead and we run Ruggs, Renfro, I mean, these guys are cheap. And then who is our run back here? Oh, Devontae Smith. Let me look and see if there's any better run back options. So Devontae Smith is clearly the guy with the highest ceiling. Yeah, Rager hadn't done anything. Watkins has had 4 weeks of low production. Wow. Now, Goddard would be a interesting one if he's going to play this week since they traded off Ertz. COVID-19. Wasn't present for practice. Okay, so keep an eye on him. He tested positive on October 12th. So he should be back for this game, I would expect. But he's 4,600. But you could run this back here with Goddard. But let's just say he doesn't play this week and go with... Oh, where'd he go? Devontae. So I like Goddard if he does play because he should get all the tight end snaps. And then defense, let's just throw one in here. Oh, who do we got? That's not the main. Browns. Nope, I don't want Browns. That's not the main slate. Sorry, I pull up the Thursday to Monday when I'm looking at players just so I get all of them in caps. Cardinals versus Houston. There you go. 3,100. That's got to be high owned this week. So this gives you 6,300 per player left. So this is kind of how I start building my stacks is I'm going Carr, 2 pass catchers, run it back with 1 pass catcher on the other side, plug in a defense, and then I say, okay, I have 6,300. Now the key here is also a tight end. So your tight end, if you use Goddard, then 6,300 per player. It's actually going to be more to fill in these other 4 spots, makes it a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and look at what that looks like. So GOE. So if we put Goddard in there, if you can stack a tight end, that fills up a spot, but tight ends are typically cheaper unless you're rolling with one of the studs. So now we're up to 6,500 per player, and this is where it becomes fun. So this is what I call a shell lineup. So I'll save this lineup, and then I'll build it 4 or 5 different ways. So some of the other pieces that we can put in here, say you want to put Derrick Henry in there. Kamara's not on this main slate, so he's not going to be in there. Fournette, Patterson, say who do we want? Let's go Darrell Williams. That game's got a huge total. We'll get a piece on each side of that game. Now we still have 5,500. Now we can come over here. Now you could even do Ridley. Ridley is cheap. And I mean, look at him. He popped up on my target chart this week. 13, 11, and 10 targets. He's going to have a blow-up game eventually. So we could get Ridley in there. That leaves us 4,400 for a flex. So we're going to scroll down here. And this is the fun part when you get to kind of bounce around, build, see what works. It's like putting together Legos. Heck, you could even get McCole Hardman in here. Put him in there, and that gives you 2 stud running backs, a good receiver. And so then you can go through, save that lineup. But say Derrick Henry is going to be too chalky, and you don't think he's going to get like a 4x game, so we're going to stay off of him. So we could pivot down here. We could go Darrell Henderson. He should get a heavy workload. Fournette had a massive game last week. Let's plug him in there. And then flex, say we're going to do this in a cash line. So we want to get another good running back. Let me see. We could do Mixon did really well. I think he had a big week last week. He's a decent matchup. Yeah, 18 carries, 94 yards, 5 for 50. Yeah, he had a really good week last week. So he had 150 total yards, 5 grabs on 6 targets, scored a TD for 26 DK points. That ain't bad. That's 4x. Let's put him in there. So we have 3 good core running backs with our stack, a good defense going up against Houston, and then we still have $6,500 for a receiver. And you could put in Evans, Sutton, Woods, A.J. Brown, Antonio Brown, Chase, Lockett. I mean, there's several different options here. Sutton would probably... no, he's the Thursday night game. He doesn't matter. But what's interesting about Sutton, look at these big games. 28, 28, 23. I mean, he's got good value. So let's just say you want to pivot off Henry. You could get A.J. Brown in there, so that's going to give you a decent lineup. But that's typically what I do is I find the shell lineup, I put my stack in there, and then I start flipping it around from there. But this is a good tool to use for stacks. Some of the other players that we like, let me pull up the fantasy article. So typically what I do is I flip game by game, and I'm going to go through and find some stacks. I note them, and then I kind of go down the game by game players and some of the other ones that I came up with. I'll start off, I come over here to our main tab. It's sorted by GPP algo, and then I'll go ahead and I will filter this out. Let's see. Whoops. Let's close this out. Let's say running backs, and then GPP algo, and then these are kind of what I'm looking at. So let me screenshot this so I can write on it and blow it up for you. And let's go up to about here. And then we'll blow this up and we'll talk about these guys. And I do this for each position, you know, so I can kind of fill in with my stack what I want to do. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. There, hopefully that takes up a good chunk of your screen. So what we've done here is we filtered this out by position to running backs, and we've sorted it by GPP algo. And this is going to give you our top running backs. Obviously, Derrick Henry's number 1. Best matchup, but again, he's going to garner a pretty good chunk of ownership. Darrell Henderson pops in at number 2 here in a good matchup against Detroit that's given up a lot of rush yards in a game. They're a heavy favorite, but again, big ownership. Aaron Jones, I haven't really looked into. Swift, haven't looked into. Leonard Fournette would be my number 3 right now that I'm looking at going up against Chicago. Tough matchup, but he's only 6,400 and decent ownership, but we're starting to come down a little bit. One of the things you can see, Swift here against the Rams, he has a micro ownership here at 2.5%. And again, these ownership projections, I haven't seen anyone that's super accurate, but it's just if you're picking between 2 players and one guy's 15% and one guy's 5%, you can say, okay, I'm going to go with the 5% guy for GPP. Taylor, I'd probably put in at number 4. He's been having some monster games, and he's projected at a low 5% ownership. I like him. San Francisco is not elite. They're good. Kamara, he's not on the main slate, but he would be my number 5 if you're playing a monster slate. Seattle's given up a ton of rush yards per game, and he should get 20 carries in this because Winston's not very good at throwing the ball. Mixon would be my number 6. He's only 6,500. Big game last week. His ownership's projected. So if you're building the lineup and you're looking at like Darrell Henderson up here versus Mixon, then this is where you would look at ownerships and say, okay, I've got enough room. He's 6,600. Mixon is 6,500. I could play either one of these guys. Well, Henderson's projected at 28% and Mixon's projected at 3.7. Okay, GPP, I'm going to go Mixon here because he's going to be lower owned. Cash game, it doesn't matter. You can either chalk and go Henderson, but that's kind of what I do with the ownership projections. Edmonds, that's a split backfield. Don't have a lot of interest in that. Mike Davis, don't really have a lot of interest in that, although he is only $5,000. Gibson's questionable. If Gibson does not play, then J.D. McKissick becomes very interesting because he is inexpensive, and this guy's getting 8 to 10 targets a game. It's insane. Hines, I don't have an interest in. Love Darrell Williams. He's my next one. This game has a 57.5 total. The ownership didn't pull through. So we're not saying he's going to be 0% owned. It just didn't pull through if it's showing 0. So I definitely think he's going to have some ownership in there. Barkley's questionable. We don't know if he's going to play. And then we got Kana, and then I like Chuba this week at 61. I think I forgot to put him in the article even. He's projected at a low ownership, and he's in a really good spot. So Chuba versus the Giants is one. And let me scroll back over here to the sheet. So over here on Advanced DVP, this is another tool that one of our members brought up. So on our stack tab, you can see we have down here kind of projected yardages that we use to calculate stuff. And someone asked, can I put all this in a sorted box with, these, how they rank versus wide receiver one. So over here on Advanced DVP, we put that in a box. So you can see Tennessee's playing Kansas City, and this is how Kansas City does versus wide receiver ones, twos, tight ends, and running backs. So you can sort this at the sortable column, and then our projected yards. What I typically do for player props is I come in here and I sort largest to smallest for rush yards, and I say, okay, who's some running backs I can get a piece of? Well, obviously Derrick Henry is the top one. And then, we got Arizona. It's a split. We got Kamara. We went over him in the price pick video. This is a Thursday night game. But this is interesting. Carolina comes in projected around 137 rush yards. So I'm not looking at the exact number. I'm looking at, they're the top 7 in rush yards that could be. So that's where Chuba kind of jumps in there. And so when I saw him pop up in the top, 10, 15 players at 6,100 and a low ownership, he's someone that kind of jumped out at me that I was interested in. But anyways, this is kind of what I do for running backs. So running backs, I like Henry, Henderson, Fournette, Taylor, Kamara, Mixon, solid. Watch Gibson's status. If not, McKissick becomes playable. I like Darrell Williams. He's cheap. I like Chuba. He's cheap. Booker, if Saquon doesn't play, which I don't think he will, he's going to be inexpensive and in a decent spot. But anyways, I hope you guys like the Daily Fantasy Sports video. Subscribe to the channel. We have our prize pick player prop video and our NFL sports betting video posted. Thursday is content day where we just flood it out there. So we'll talk soon. Have a good day. I'm going to go drink my second cup of coffee.